diseases will now lose their health care because of an edict, no congressional action, but an edict from President Trump, who acts as Obama did through edicts, since the Congress is paralyzed. This is the repeal and replace Obamacare is going to get rid of a lot of insurance coverage. Also, the religious exception is being used to take away women's right to contraception. The tax plan of Trump is going to cut corporate taxes enormously, and taxes for the wealthy. It is a total boon to the very wealthy in the country on the argument that it will create more jobs. It's nonsense. There's no relationship necessarily between them having more money and other people seeing industrial development or jobs. The regulatory and social welfare agencies of the country, as you know, now have people in charge of them who don't believe in them and who want to see them erased. So the energy industry is now in the hands of the energy corporations of coal and oil. The EPA is being weakened and divided. The occupational safety and health workers at the CDC and so on. Every agency in government that does anything positive for working class people is seeing its organization redefined, reorganized, budgets cut, staff laid off, restrictions weakened that would affect working class people. So that's the very broad attack. Now what about the unions more specifically? Well, we have this case in the United States called the Janus case. It's a case that will come before the Supreme Court. If you were following earlier the Friedrichs case, it's the same deal. It's about the corporations wanting to stop the unions from being able to collect political money from all of their members. That's what the case affects. However, it will be accompanied by a huge employer campaign saying, you not only don't have to give, among public employees, it will say, you not only don't have to give them political money, you don't have to give them any money. Don't pay your dues, leave the union. So there's going to be a big campaign by employers associated with that. Also, in the U.S. Congress, there is a federal right-to-work law that is before the U.S. Congress, put forward, of course, by the Republicans. There are 28 states in the United States, right-to-work, which in the United States means that you can't have a union shop. You can't have a closed shop. You can't require unionization. Right to work used to only exist in the Deep South, where there was a legacy of slavery, of Jim Crow system, and servile labor. It now exists in 28 states, including places like Michigan, which was the center of the organization of the CIO unions in the 1930s in the auto industry. Of course, Trump is also changing the officials in the Labor Department and changing the officials at the National Labor Relations Board, which governs union recognition. So we are going to see, I think many people following the labor movement closely believe that in 1 year, the labor will be in a totally different situation in the United States. This will not be the labor movement that we have known. There's also right-to-work laws, not only for public employees, but for private sector employees, put forward in many states. So then the question is, what is the possibility of U.S. labor to respond to this? Well, as you saw, Trump began his administration by inviting in the leaders of the National Building Trades Unions of North America, as it's now called. They don't even consider themselves part of the AFL-CIO, as far as I can tell. The NBTUA, the National Building Trades Unions of America. They embrace Trump. Trump says, we're going to give you jobs. We're going to build an infrastructure. We're going to build a border wall. That'll take a lot of workers. And we're going to increase military spending. That'll take a lot of workers. And we're going to give people jobs. And so this is one of the most influential sectors of the United States labor movement. It is the unions that formed the core of the American Federation of Labor. And they were historically largely white male unions. They were unions that were racist, that were white unions. So all of that legacy in the past is there behind this. So Trump very cleverly divided the labor movement. He also said, as they said the other day in Paducah, Kentucky, to cheering corporate leaders and some mine union officials, we're ending the war on coal. Hot dog. So they're ending the war on coal. Coal is a declining section, but coal can be shipped all over the world, and they are going to continue to produce coal. And of course, that attracts the mine workers, and the head of the AFL-CIO comes out of the mine workers union. So these are very clever moves to divide. to divide the unions, to make the head of the AFL-CIO feel his own base, cannot be relied upon. So this had a profound effect on the labor movement. Now the majority of the labor unions in the United States are those that were deeply committed to Hillary Clinton. That is, and to Obama. They were committed to Obama and Clinton, that is to say, to exactly what we're discussing here today, that is the neoliberal economic agenda. So the unions have nothing to offer that rejects that rejects the system that brought us Trump. They are for what brought us Trump, is the way that I would put it. And there were a few unions that supported Bernie Sanders. They were outliers, they were small. Communication Workers of America, National Nurses United, American Postal Workers Union, I think another. Those unions, of course, that represented another tendency. And of course, associated with Sanders was the notion of, one, a kind of a social democratic program, in the American terms, a liberal program, a kind of Franklin Roosevelt kind of view of American politics, but also legitimating the word socialism. So a little bit in that camp, we can say there is a kind of a left, but it's very marginal and weak in terms of the whole union situation. What is the actual just numbers strength of the American labor movement in terms of being able to respond? The private sector is about 6.7% organized. That is 93% of all American workers in the private sector, 93% have no union. If we look at the unions as a whole, 11% of workers are organized as a whole. So that means that 89% of the American working class has no union in whatever sector they're in. There have been no large strikes to speak of in the United States for years and years and years. Strikes, of course, as we know, are really at the center of a labor movement, because it is in the strike when workers are organized, they're mobilized, they take cognizance of an issue of importance in their union, they understand there's something to be dealt with, they decide to risk their personal fortunes, their job, perhaps even their lives in fighting a strike. It's a constant mobilization of workers, which used to be at least every 3 years where your contract come up, you might have a strike. But contracts, of course, became extended to 4 and 5 years. We've had no major strikes in the United States for a long, long time. The teacher strike in Chicago a few years ago was a very important strike. We had the Verizon strike of 40,000 workers in New York. But it's hard to think and name any others. We have nothing like, for example, think of the tremendous strike wave of 1971. Those of you who are old enough, if you don't remember it, it's worth reading about. That is, in 1971 in the United States, strikes swept the trucking industry, the postal workers, the telephone company, many, many, many industries. We have nothing like that. And of course, strikes are your preparation to be active, to be part of a union, to be engaged in a fight. I would dare say 95% of American workers have never been to a union meeting. It's a guess. But in unions I belong to, you never saw more than a handful of people really come to a union meeting out of the thousands or 10, as the unions became bigger, less democratic, organizations like SEIU create these monster unions with thousands upon thousands of members. The membership participation rate is extremely low. So there's no, and I'd like to add one other thing here. The organized labor movement shows zero capacity, zero, to relate to the social movements. That is, we have Occupy Wall Street happen in a couple of unions in, not 0%, 1%, okay. A couple of unions in Chicago. The United Federation of Teachers opened up their office to the Occupy Wall Street. The Transportation Workers Union Local 100 went to march with the workers. To their surprise, I think a lot of them got arrested. But those are real exceptions. That is, Occupy Wall Street swept the country. It was a huge movement. Labor could have stepped into it everywhere and said, this is our movement. These people are speaking out against inequality. They're speaking out for a more equal America. They're speaking out for the unemployed, for the underdogs, for the precarious workers, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't step forward for one damn minute to do anything for Occupy Wall Street. And Obama coordinated, if you don't know this, the crushing of Wall Street from the White House with the Democratic mayors. Almost all cities have Democratic Party mayors who arrested about 8,000 people in Wall Street, some of them accused of terrorism, many of them beaten, gassed, and so on. A horrible, horrible experience, and where was labor? Take Black Lives Matter. Where was labor? Black Lives Matter, the most important black civil rights movement appearing in the United States for 50 years, and the labor movement is gone. They cannot step forward to say, we oppose racism. We won't let this happen. They can't be there. Even in the Women's March that took place the day after the inauguration, I went to that. I have to say I saw some straggling labor groups, and there were some women, particularly women union groups, that endorsed the Pussy Hat demonstration in Washington. But they were very, very minimal. You know, it was very small. The labor movement is unable to relate to the social movements, and the social movements is where there's any sense of both a fight and a radical ideology. So I guess my view of this is that the working class movement has no sense of even its own identity. There's no sense of an identity of being part of a working class movement. And I would say not even in the unions. There's a sectoral identity, there's a craft identity, there's a very narrow identity of a certain group of workers. But there's no sense that we have to be part of this as a working class as a whole. There's no unity, as I've described. And part of this is the way that they bought in with the coal and oil industries, made partners with the Chamber of Commerce and so on. McGarvey, who's the head of this national building trade, says, well, don't talk about the Koch brothers. Those are some of our best employers and so on. So these people are totally bought into the most right-wing forces. There can be no unity with some of the other unions with them. The labor movement is divided. There's no sense of political independence from the Democratic Party, the ability to have their own independent agenda. Of course, they've never been able to do that, but it's pathetic now to see what the current situation is. And of course, there's no possibility that such a labor movement can have much of an impact on NAFTA, is my belief, or they can do much to work in alliance with and solidarity and support with Mexican and Canadian workers. And I don't, been for years in an equally bad position. The Canadian workers, I don't know much about it, so I'd be quiet about it. But I think that we had the idea was at one time, the emancipation of the working class shall be the task of the working class itself. This working class is not up to its self-emancipation at this moment. Quote another line from Marx, but the working class has to become fit to rule. It can only become fit to rule by experimenting and struggling against those who rule. So, and of course, the idea that the working class could liberate humanity, which is the goal, our socialist vision, I know many of you in here are socialists, that our socialist vision is that the working class should be the force to liberate humanity. It won't be doing anything in the United States in the near future, and I think we have to look to other sectors in the social movements to provide the spark of leadership and so on, because the labor movement is over more about it.
Pack up and go home.
Just finish it up. No, I didn't say, we will still fight. We will still fight, but it won't be.